I would like to warmly welcome you for this vast but panel discussion reflecting on the importance of freedom of expression, especially explore the countless challenges that are placed in this intersection that we're going to reflect upon now. Let me invite the panelists to the stage. Um, they will be joined by panelists Shah Mandrati, Dr. Ram Kalamasuriya, Dr. Inish, and Sanam Vanvarache. I invite all the panelists to join us on the stage, please. Dr. Shah Mandrati is an international award-winning investigative journalist and a lawyer from Sri Lanka. She has worked extensively across South Asia, both as a ground reporter and trainer, dedicating much of her time working with women journalists in the region. As an investigative journalist, she has broken stories on grand corruption and crime, conflict and communities, and dedicated significant time reporting women, children, health, and environment. Her work has appeared in UK Guardian, New York Times, Al Jazeera, The Humanitarian, Longer Day, and many other publications. A recipient of many prestigious journalism fellowships, she has won the coveted Wash Media Award in 2014 for reporting on NDGs, which is monitoring category by the WSSCC and SIWI for the report on school sanitation and the impact on girl children. In 2012, she won Sri Lanka's topmost journalism award, Journalist of the Year. And rights organizations, especially with gender focus. She is the co-convener of South Asian Women in Media, chapter, and functions as the executive director of the Bangladesh Center for Investigative Reporting. Thank you, Dorothy, for coming here. Dr. Ranga Kalamasuriya is the advisor for Asia and Asia Pacific at the International Media Support, Denmark. He is among the 5 finalists of the 2021 inaugural Canada United Kingdom Media Freedom Award to recognize the journalists, individuals, and organizations that actively promote and protect media freedom around the world. He is also a senior advisor of Factum. He has experience in working with responsible social media use and social media use in crisis in Myanmar, Cambodia, Pakistan, and in Philippines. He was previously the Director General of the Department of Government Information. He also served as the Director General of Sri Lanka Press Institute, Sri Lanka College of Journalism, and Press Complaints Commission of Sri Lanka, prior to 2010. Welcome, Doctor. Dasha Illich is an experienced journalist, former BBC World Service reporter, a news editor, and an expert on diversity and inclusion in the media. As a consultant for the Media Diversity Institute, Dasha has been working on the programs dedicated to freedom of expression and hate speech online, religious intolerance, discrimination, disinformation, targeting of marginalized communities. In 2022, together with the hashtag Generation, she conducted 2 workshops in Sri Lanka, while in 2020, she worked with the independent media outlets in Ukraine, Russia, and Eurasia region. She held a number of trainings for journalists and civil society activists in China, UK, Lebanon, Morocco, and the Western Balkans. Welcome, Dasha, and thank you for joining with us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's my privilege.
Last but not the least, Sanal Vanvarache is a co-founder and the director at Hashtag Generation. He is currently a PhD candidate at the London School of Economics and Political Science in the UK, where he is also a graduate teacher. Sanal has an MSc in Human Rights, also from LSE, which he followed on Children Scholarship and a BA in International Relations from the University of Colombo. Welcome, Sanal. Sanal will be joining us online all the way from UK. So we're looking forward to hearing from Sunil as well. So to kick off the panel discussion today, I would want to invite all the panelists to share your initial thoughts, especially starting on, I want to start with a very simple question, just to set the ground and the context for the discussion. In this day and age, what does freedom of expression mean to you? And why is such a contested and hot topic? Yes.
Thank you so much. And I'm just recovering from a very bad cough and a cold, so sorry about the nasal sound. I think it's become, if we had a discussion about what media freedom meant to us a few years ago and what it means today, I'm sure going by what we saw during the previous Lightning Talks segment, there were examples to show how close it is to every citizen. There was a time when we thought freedom of expression was all about journalists and journalism and people who actually had the right to control the information flow, because it was a one-way street. We produce content, you receive content. But this has changed, and we have so much to thank technology for. While we may be dealing with a lot of issues about technology, and we will discuss that as we go on, but it has also made it more democratic, a space where everybody can engage, which is also why a lot of so-called journalists would be engaging in the discourse. As the hashtag generations, logo goes, like, we, as citizens, we have a role to play. And what do citizens play? What role can we all play in promoting freedom of expression? Freedom of expression is not something that is so absolute. And I think oftentimes we have this issue also that, like any other freedom, we also have inherent checks and balances. And when we have issues and we have conflicts and confrontations around this stems from the fact that we don't necessarily understand that there would also be limitations. There are legal limitations, cultural limitations, there would be social limitations, all of which. And I was listening to Dilisha, and she was talking about the difficulties about reporting on conflict zones. So there are issues that you actually have to be sensitive about. They will be obviously regulated either through law or by other social norms. And when it's also a very interesting time today, because we are having this discussion about what's the role of tech companies, for example. There is no discussion without the role of tech companies, because these are the platforms we use, citizens use, and more popular user-generated content is there, and it's driven by audience engagement. So I think it's a very interesting time, and I find that the discourse has enormously changed, and the traditional newsroom has been seriously challenged.
I will just continue. I can't agree more that the traditional newsrooms looked completely different in 20th century. And partially, I think that when I got your questions and when I've heard freedom of expression, my first reaction to that is, I don't like this term. Why don't I like this term? This is my right. It's universal human right. I don't like this term because it's being used and misused by the propagators of far right. Donald Trump, Elon Musk, those who are claiming that it's their right to freedom of expression to perpetuate maybe hate speech against, again, marginalized and vulnerable. So I think you're absolutely right to pose this question. Maybe it is time to redefine that. I also struggle with what is freedom of expression. I know that in journalism, for us, somehow it's easier because we know that freedom of expression journalism is not the same. We know what to do when we get to the point not to censor, but to implement our code of ethics and how we report. So we don't have a problem with that. Somehow, the point that I wanted to make, and specifically after listening the whole day debate and excellent panelists, excellent moderators. So thank you, hashtag, really, for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to listen to the debates, I wanted actually to make a point about this right to freedom of expression being in the hands of the government, any government, including Sri Lankan government. But also I have a problem with exercising the right to freedom of expression and letting it go to the hands of social media, meaning privately owned, California-based people. So as we had this innovation giving us the opportunity at the beginning that we thought it is democratization of our public sphere, now I have a problem with what it has turned to. So maybe for the start, I'll just say this much.
And thank you for inviting. We heard different perspectives from the larger picture of journalism and media landscape. Let me take you to the Sri Lankan context, specifically with the media perspective. We heard Delisha talking about the limitations in coverage, and Chaturanga added some points to that. But in few days' time, we will be celebrating our 75th independence as a bankrupt nation. We are going to celebrate it with pride. That's what the government say. But if you take this collapse of economy of the country, you cannot just frame it only for economic collapse. As for my reading, it's a collection of factors, including social and political, and even to some extent cultural. I don't want to bring that, but maybe social and political connotations. In that entire picture, if you talk about media, personally, I believe the fact that media has at least 50% responsibility for this collapse in Sri Lanka. When I say media, that includes the owners, the policymakers of media, the gatekeepers. I will not put the blame entirely on the journalists, because in the newsroom or in the media house, journalists are not the sole decision makers. In that context, I would put the entire blame or most of the blame on the media owners. If you take the media ownership index in Sri Lanka, you can list at least 10 or 12 of them. And if you go by one, every individual has a personal agenda, either on politics or economic. I wouldn't put economic solely on that, but that economic interest also sometimes bogged down to personal political interests. Delisha mentioned about the Ahudgam incident, the Muslim Buddhist so-called riots. She explained how she faced challenges when reporting it. We saw how the aftermath of Easter bomb attack, how media behaved. How media behaved during the COVID-19. For media, it was not a health issue. For media, it was kind of a political game on the forced burial issues. Everything has to do with some ethnic tension or religious tension. So what we saw in April last year, where Sri Lanka announced its bankruptcy, is not just because of economy. Our entire system collapsed. Our political system collapsed. Our economic system collapsed. Our social system collapsed. And I will stop my initial introduction by repeating my fact that media in Sri Lanka is responsible at least 50% of this calamity. That includes, of course, ourselves. When we say media, because this country was taken for a ride for the last, I wouldn't say 75 years, but at least half of it. And media was the communicator of all these calamities, all these conspiracies. So we can discuss in detail, but that's my firm belief.
Thank you, Candice, for the initial thought. Let's quickly hear also from Sunil Dhamarachi, who's joining us. Please.
Hello, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, Sunil, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Let me also just very quickly say that I'm really sad to not be there in person, and I'm really proud of everyone at Hashtag for doing this. And this is amongst 100 other things that you guys are doing as well. And I miss you guys, and I wish I was around in person. But to answer the question, and I'm also really happy to be here with basically Dilrukshi, Ranga, and Dasha as well, and then just to share some quick thoughts. And I think the question was an important question that was asked, and maybe I can just continue from where Ranga stopped as well, with a focus more on social media. On the 6th of January, if I'm not mistaken, the president, Ranil Wickremesinghe, said he wants to regulate social media, and this was the language that was used. And what he also said is that they will draw inspiration from what's been happening in Singapore in relation to the social media regulation laws that are being used in Singapore at the moment. And of course, there was no more information that was shared, but I think the reference is for a law called POFMA, which is the Protection from Online Falsehoods Act in Singapore. And I think this kind of narrative can be dangerous, because what's been happening in Singapore and has been documented by kind of human rights organizations and so on very well, is that this law specifically has been used to target opposition politicians, activists, and critiques of the government, because it gives power to a single member of the government, basically a minister, to either declare something as true or false, and then also ask social media companies to remove these posts or kind of brand them as true or false. And I think this could be extremely dangerous, particularly thinking of social media, specifically within the context of everything that the other speakers have already shared as well. And this is not because social media companies are doing a really good job in terms of their moderation systems. I think we also need to be clear about that actually these companies are not upholding their kind of community standards and so on, and not doing a good job, some more than others. But because it's not really because we trust these companies, but because we mistrust the state more. And this is the kind of the negotiation that we've had to make in these situations. So I think these kinds of challenges are things that we need to negotiate when it comes to the freedom of expression, specifically in the context of social media. And I think when I say we mistrust the state more, I guess it's for two main reasons. But one, because the state has been kind of specifically infringing on the freedom of expression in different ways by targeting, cracking down on activists, journalists, and so on. But two, also because the state has been the promoter of disinformation and hate speech and so on themselves. So the biggest kind of disinformation story in Sri Lanka in the past few years was the forced cremations. And that was specifically shared by the state. So I think that's also the danger of kind of giving the state the power to mediate the truth from falsehood, because the state is one infringing on people's ability to speak, but also promoting hate and disinformation themselves as well. I guess I don't have a lot more time, so I will stop here. Thank you.
Yes, Sanu. So thank you, panelists, for sharing your initial thoughts on how uh, now every single traditional media is going through a period of disruption where they had to compete with the user-generated content, and also for sharing about how the power of media is converged in very few, that they have the propagandization of free speech, and very few has become the arbitrators of what can be said and what cannot be said. I'm also touching about media ownership and how state has been weaponizing both regulations as well as disinformation space. So I want to ask, as an extension of Samal's point to Dr. Kalamasuya, this is a question, this is almost like a buzzword we keep hearing again and again, right? The regulation of social media and the steps that are taken to regulate social media. And we have seen this time and time again where social media blocks are implemented starting from 2018, and it has repeated almost annually, we could say. So how do we understand this?
This is the problem of having this dinosaurs in big seats in governance. They're yet to understand the dynamics of information ecosystem of the day. They think the information ecosystem can be ruled or controlled by bringing laws under the Roman Dutch law. They don't understand the Gen Z. This is the problem. Singapore can do that because Singapore is a massive economy and it's a regional giant. Number one. Can Sri Lanka follow that model now, even when we are bankrupt and collapse? And can we challenge a company, US based, as she said, US based company, which has 3 billion users, a US company, by bringing laws? Can we challenge them in Sri Lanka now? And will they abide by those laws? So Singapore is also reviewing their laws now. We have to say that. But again, it's not the way to tackle social media issues. What are the issues? Disinformation, hate speech, bullying, fake news, or whatever you call it. We have identified the issues. Issues are identified, but what is the response? This is not an issue only for the society, but even to those companies as well. How many times Mr. Zuckerberg has apologized in public because he doesn't have a solution? They are also struggling with solution. So we, as a country, we should go for a win-win situation with these social media tech companies. That's what we have done. That's what we have done so far, to negotiate with these companies and bring a common code of conduct, a Sri Lanka focus regulatory system, self-regulatory system. It's have gone to a great extent. We have signed the agreement or MOUs with these companies, and now we are in the last stage of finalizing the code. Within a couple of weeks, or maybe 1 or 2 weeks, we can announce the code. So let's try out without bringing laws. Bringing laws is in the era of dinosaurs, not it's Jurassic Park model. Bringing laws, no. This is a new era. This is a new technology. This is a new information ecosystem. We have enough laws in this country. If someone has done some mischief in the social media platform, we have enough laws to handle that. You don't need new laws. We have seen that. For the last 1 or 2 years in Sri Lanka, how many successful cases of defamation, hate speech, freedom of religion and belief, the latest case on YouTube, on the Dalai Lama Liga, the Antadhatu issue. We have flaws in this country. Why you need a new law? You don't need a new laws. Just deal with the existing ones. But how you control a US company with Sri Lankan laws? You can't. It's not practical. It has happened in many countries, but it's not practical. It's not a solution. So we are also concerned about it. I'm sure there will be a new mechanism to regulate this content within very few weeks in Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Doctor. Especially talking about how do we find the win-win situation. And one of the things we have consistently observed is that some of these companies become the easiest scapegoats as well, in addition to the deficiencies that are found within the systems itself. I want to ask Ms. Hamdunati a quick question on, you spoke about the era of, we live in an era of user-generated content, right? And also, medias are automatically tested, having to compete with every single person who has a smartphone, who are able to immediately create content and share them. And this, as a result, all the mainstream medias are required in a way or compelled to have an online presence. So, in this era, how does mainstream media compete effectively? And furthermore, how do they win back the trust from the public? Because one of the issues is when they have to compete, then there are issues of clickbait, sloppy journalism that you also see, right? So how does mainstream media effectively compete in the era of user-generated content?
I think if you look at global examples as well, some of the much larger international media houses are actually having a rethink, and they're looking at new revenue models. One of the things that we have to definitely consider is that the old guard has failed. So Ranga was talking about dinosaurs. So this is also an approach that is deeply linked to that. We have to accept that technology has revolutionized the media landscape, and we have new opportunities, we have new problems, and we have to find solutions towards both. And what I don't find in Sri Lanka, if we talk about the Sri Lankan context, is that in terms of finding solutions, creative solutions to that. So in newsrooms now, there should be ideally, and this is something that we are often talking, discussing with some of the media houses, the mainstream media houses. I do work with some of them because I think some of them are actually acknowledging there is a problem and that you have to find a solution. So earlier there was a newsroom output. Now you also have to have a social media output. So this is one creative solution, because if the big media houses like The Guardian and the New York Times and all else has to consider new solutions, new approaches, there is no way that in Sri Lanka, with such a small, market, that you're not going to explore something. And what is our first obligation? It is to truth. So this is probably where that integrity of content, as opposed to user-generated content, people expect whatever that you see on social media, you don't necessarily have to accept as truth. People do. People are moved and influenced by that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that each of those users carry the same weight that a journalist has. Right? Journalistic-driven content is expected, and I'm not saying they are abiding by that. Why does it happen? Most of the time in newsrooms, people even don't know how to use digital tools to fact check. We have seen multiple times in which that we have made these huge blunders. We have taken content out of social media and used it in the mainstream. And there is so much of egg on your face because you are supposed to be the market leader or the path maker, because we think that we morally have the right to say this, that we are the storytellers, that you are not. This has been part of that dinosaur discourse, right? Where we continuously say, you don't have the right, but we do. But if you do, with that comes great responsibility. There is economic responsibility, there is social responsibility, there's moral responsibility, there is legal responsibility, all of which you really have to fulfill. And so addressing some of these, if I may say that, I belong to that other generation. But addressing that generation gap in newsrooms is critical. This is also why in so many European newsrooms now fact checkers are becoming storytellers. Why? Because if you want to have public trust, you have to have verified information in the first place. As journalists, as media houses, you're expected to do that, and you cannot complain that the user-generated content is often false or drives the narrative. You are borrowing from that narrative. You are responsible for correcting the narrative, at least within that limited space of a newsroom, if you are going to put it out in the public domain.
Thank you for elaborating on the point, especially how the deficiencies that are found in the newsroom, especially the lack of digital transformation among the journalists, is a big challenge in that space. I would like to ask a question to Dasha, especially you having worked with journalists all around the globe, and especially doing, like having worked in Sri Lanka as well. How do we engage citizens in a constructive way to address some of the challenges that are posed in the age of social media, especially when the freedom of expression is violated or used irresponsibly?
Tough question. I think I'm trying to draft some of the answers here, and I'm thinking about everything that you said and how you contributed. I think that now it's time to say that I think the problem between the social media users or citizens, or as Jay Rossen said, audience formerly known as people, because now we think about them as the audience because somehow we're in that ecosystem of social media posting. The solution might be in engaging them in a trustful, ethical way. Because what I think has happened is that people lost trust in the media. They lost trust in the government, in the institutions. Somehow in the 20th century, maybe they thought, wait a second, you think that you are producing the news and you are serving me the information in that one-way linear world, whilst you have no idea what's my reality and what I'm interested in. And then the innovation, technological innovation came, the social media networks were created, which I have to say, for some of the vulnerable groups are still the safe space. For instance, for transgender community in Egypt. If there wasn't social media, they would not probably be supported by each other and Sisi would track them all down. But I think that media, having the code of ethics and having some sort of, not moral high ground, but some sort of practical way of dealing with information, as a first step needs to accept it was our mistake. We lost you guys because we did not report on obviously failures of the system, rising inequalities, populism, climate change, turning things into really wrong direction, as far as I'm concerned. But then we have the active citizens. You know, I follow the news about Sri Lanka from the UK, and I would hear, not only in the UK, but also in the Balkans where I'm from, as saying of defiance, you know, against the, for instance, Serbian government or Tory government in London. You'll see Sri Lanka will happen to you, which means people will happen to you. And I think the most active, maybe constructive way to engage the citizens is to be transparent with them. Look, we have a problem. We can't fix hate speech on Facebook or Instagram because it's really turning against the Goliath. You know, algorithms likes the hate. Algorithms are set up to work on the conflict, and we cannot fix it. As you said, who we are to fix the problem of algorithms set up by TikTok or Instagram or Meta, sorry. But I think being transparent and being in touch, maybe that's the solution. But I'm not sure. I would go for trust. I would go for transparency anytime in any field. Just be transparent, even if you're wrong.
Thank you, Dasha. I will have a quick question to Seno So the question is, especially talking on the intergenerational perspective, how do you think technology has impacted the diversity of voices and perspectives in the media and freedom of expression? Like reflecting upon how the freedom of expression was conceived among the parental generations and the millennial generation and Gen Z right now. And what are some of your observations regarding it?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think social media has played a really important role in our democracy, right? I mean, as hashtag, we like social media is the reason we exist. Basically, we started as a Facebook page a few like what now 8 years ago, I think, and that's just we started making posters on Canva and posting them on like Facebook, and this is basically social media is the reason we exist, and we didn't think of ourselves as people who will be hosting important conferences at posh hotels, but basically social media is kind of the space that social media created is actually what allowed us to grow in this way as well. And I think it is true for a lot of different types of people and organizations as well, specifically to kind of hold governments accountable and so on, but also to do all kinds of things, right? To if you are an entrepreneur, to kind of to promote your work and raise funds and so on. So I think social media has definitely given people a voice in that sense, and we saw this happen during Aragalaya as well. Like there was the on the ground Occupy kind of work that was going on, but people were then live streaming. People were using social media to amplify this voice, and social media was used as the space to kind of organize, kind of raise support, say we are running out of water, can you get water? So this was kind of social media was instrumental to that. So I think, and I think what everyone else said about the social media kind of playing a key role in democracy is completely true. But I think also the flip side of that actually some of the actors that we that are challenging democracy, that are also advocating for the types of things we don't like racism and Dasha mentioned transphobia in the UK, where I am at the moment as well. These types of people using social media as well is also extremely effective. And even in Sri Lanka, we spoke a lot about mainstream media and the kind of our own kind of disappointment with the mainstream media, but also the mainstream media also still has a big hold over social media as well. Like some of the biggest YouTube channels in the country are still some of the big mainstream TV and TV channels in the country as well. So I think we still need to find ways to kind of resist these things, and of course the companies as well need to kind of be doing a lot more in that sense, in terms of enforcing their own community standards basically, and everything else and anything we can be doing like the initiative that Ranga mentioned as well, to kind of push them towards that, hold them accountable to that, I think are great. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanal. Let me quickly open the floor for audience question. There'll be mics, that'll be brought to you. Kindly introduce yourself, and you can pose the question to the whole panel or specific panelists. Any questions?
Audience is silent.
Right. So until we have questions, I have one more question following up on the last panel where the speakers shared about the power of storytelling and the power of narratives, right? And I want to specifically point to the whole struggle that happened last year, Aragalaya, and one of the biggest lacuna that which we have seen, which also points to the point Dr. Kalamasuri made, was the way media decide to cover certain events, which goes on in the newspaper, on television, on the radio, and which doesn't go on there, right? And thanks to social media, in a certain extent, that some of these suppressed narratives will bring to the forefront, right? And especially, I want to just reflect on a specific example. Every May 18th, when is one of the fascinating days as an audience of the social media, but also it's a very heavy day coming from where I come from, right? The whole narratives about we won the war, and also the whole narratives about we need to respect those who have lost their lives during the last days of the war. And I always call it the war of narratives that particular day. So, in such a situation where, in a country like Sri Lanka, where social media has become an imperative tool or a vehicle to bring these forgotten narratives, how does media institution, how does media institution, how do people coexist with the media institution? Because the more I see, the less I see these narratives on mainstream medias, the more people will be prone to go get their content from social media. So how do we tackle this challenge? How do we create this coexistence?
There is a very cardinal word that repeated in this flow, which is trust. Dasha repeated it, and also repeated that word, the trust. Sri Lanka, that's exactly what Sri Lanka needs now, from political perspective and also from economic and social perspective. Why people got on the street early 2022, looking for that particular thing called trust. They have lost the trust of every single institution in this country, including media. Because the role the media played for the last 2 to 3 decades in this country, after the opening of the frequencies in early 90s, was extremely detrimental to the society, to the country. It was the media with deals, whether it's print or broadcast. They thought, quote unquote, they thought people can be taken for a ride through planting stories. So it was happening. And the trust on the mainstream was entirely lost. Now, imagine if we didn't have social media, the Kalaniya Nagia story is still alive. The channel will be repeating it. And the owner is still justifying the story. Even last week, he justified it. And people will be still having Dhammika opinion. It's not social media. I mean, we can list out all this. So Dr. Safi is still a criminal, if not social media. The basis of democracy, according to Fukuyama, is accountability and transparency. Those are the two cardinal features of a democracy: transparency and accountability. So, of course, independent media. So, if the media is entirely politicized and taken for a ride or doing deals, underhand deals, how do you ensure accountability and transparency in a society? Thankfully, we had at least learned citizens who are using social media to counter this massive blatant lies by the mainstream. Don't go that far. Look at 2 months ago, the stories and narratives that were fabricated on television channels, the mainstream news channels, about the students are using the drug called ICE. What the campaign they ran for a couple of weeks. Where is this story now? So students have stopped taking these drugs to schools. Is that the case? So this is how the narrative is built. So where is the trust? Who owns this plant and stories? Who keep check and balances of this? And we are still doing that. Still doing that. Even today we are doing that. Even as a collapsed nation. How to start this? What is the turning point? So what people came on street a year ago and demanded is that trust, accountability, and transparency. That's all we need. That's it. Please ensure Sri Lanka has transparency and accountability. And who is responsible for that? Us, the media. Without deals. That's the bottom line of it.
Thank you, Doctor. Other panelists, please feel free to answer if you next.
Like add to what Ranga said and probably unpack it. So I came from a newsroom during years of conflict and war. So you were talking about the coexistence of social media as well as mainstream media, and both spaces becoming useful to the public, right? The users, our audiences, our readers, our listeners, whoever they are. But what I've seen in the newsroom is a reflection of the divisions that he was speaking about, the kind of divisions that owners drive, politicians and political parties in government at that moment would drive. So we had a war for over 26 years. And during that time, the polarization of the media has never been really addressed. There's been conflict sensitive reporting. There's been, humanitarian reporting. You have had safety reporting. You've had all kinds of training sprees in this country. But with all that, when Dr. Shafi's incident happens, or when you want to also celebrate an event that is associated with a community or a religious community that is marginalized in this country, we go back to our original positions of absolutely divisive ways of, presenting it. And I also see, and I would also say that the social media also has a representation of it, because when we say the internet is weaponized, and we have a serious problem with that, you also see these people in groups driving not just dissent, but also, clearly towards violence and communal divisions. So in the newsrooms, we have never really addressed these years of decades of polarized media narratives. Much earlier, there was a discussion about narrative building and storytelling. So our stories have always been one-sided. I'm an ethnic Sinhalese, then I would tell the story of the Sinhalese. Is that my job? Is that what I represent in this country? And what are the narratives? Where are the narratives? And how do we bring the narratives? And also counter narratives. People don't like counter narratives because there's a word counter. Counter would also mean that you're eternally countering. So that is not necessarily the role of the media, but alternative narratives are definitely the responsibility of the media, because there are multiple narratives in any society. And particularly a fractured, bleeding society like ours requires all those narratives to find at least some space, because I say some space because we are never going to give them equal space. So you had embedded journalists, they believed in promoting the war effort, they were glorified, they were supported, recognized. Then you also have other groups, then they also identify themselves with communities, with, marginalization of religious minorities. So when you have this entire conundrum, it's really a very difficult one. We have never really addressed the fundamental flaw in the newsrooms of bringing them to responsibly narrate all the narratives that are present within our country.
Tarindu Jayawardena of Lankadeepa. I'm not scared to tell names here. I'm ready to face even a legal challenge. Tarindu Jayawardena has to leave the newsroom and the company because he brought the counter narrative of Dr. Safi. And when he started writing of the counter narrative of Safi in the newsroom, a particular editor wanted him out. So he has to go out of the newsroom. Simple.
Nasha, would you like to add your observations from your work all around, working with the journalists as well as young people?
I think there is only one thing that I wanted to add, and it considers the marginalized and vulnerable groups, as we at Media Diversity Institute really try to promote. And as I mentioned, social media, and as you said, what will happen if we didn't have social media, because mainstream media didn't report right on what was happening in Sri Lanka. They didn't report right what was happening with Brexit either. And now 3 years after, we're really seeing the consequences of it. I wanted just to stress that to have in mind the vulnerable and marginalized, because someone mentioned silent majority. I think you said the silent majority joined in. I really like that expression, that somehow not to forget those that are others and that are usually scapegoats. When you mentioned the narratives and how we control them or how we observe them or fight against them, I think it's very easy to jump into scapegoating and discriminating against those who are the most vulnerable. So that, I think that's my kind of conclusion of this debate. But I think that we will be debating much more about freedom of expression and how to get out of the mess that we are all in.
Any questions from the audience? You could just raise your hands and we'll bring the mic to you. No questions yet? Right, that's okay. No, that's all right. No, she was just passing it. So one of the last, one of the questions I want to ask you to all the panelists is, sometimes the discourse is so complex and challenging. It has, sometimes we debate on the basis of jargons, technicalities, the deficiencies in the system, and so on. Where does a citizen go to find information that is trustworthy, like that has integrity? Why I ask this question is because one of the fascinating examples is on the next room, we have this exhibition called Storytelling for Democracy, where we invite young people from all around Sri Lanka to capture what does democracy mean to you, right? We didn't give them any guidelines. All we asked them was, what does democracy mean to you? Take photographs, write a caption, tell us. And what we really believed in this decentralized approach in doing that sort of storytelling is because sometimes the whole discourse is hijacked by powerful individuals, organizations, and politicians, right? For example, as Nasha pointed out, the propagandization of free speech is now like, it's in the hands of billionaires and the tech moguls and some of the policymakers. And unfortunately, some of the users do not really have a say in it, right? So in this complexity, where does a citizen go? How do we, like, what are some of the steps we can take in finding practical ways to explore this mess, especially in the context that we have local government selection coming up, right? And there's so much potential, and it's already happening, so much disinformation that is already happening in many of the social media platforms. So I'll pose this question to all the panelists.
That's a really hard one to crack to begin with. Where do we go for reliable information? So I'll just give an example, because I think it's easy to theorize, but very difficult to live through a reality. And if you recall the time when there was a lockdown and all of us, most of us are not health reporters and most of us do not know about COVID-19. And there's a tsunami of misinformation, misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, all of it, driven by companies, driven by individuals, driven by governments, driven by interest groups, lobbies, you name it, you had it, right? Mm. So this was global. This was not just for Sri Lanka. Mm. So in that seriously confusing time, where did we go? I think there lies not a very simple answer, but there is an answer. We talked about lack of trust in the media, but people also turn to certain types of media. I also think it would be very interesting to do a study on the social media discourse at that time, as compared to the Aragalaya time, where the use and the reliance on social media was high. But what kind of information were we seeking, and what was the pattern we were creating at that time? Because it was not just information; it was about life and death. At situations like that, where do we go? I can give you answers. I can mention names of trusted platforms. They are trusted, they are flawed, not necessarily trusted the way they were, but there is a lesson to be learned. And I think if ever journalists wanted to cash in on a situation, there was that onus was quickly shifting to verified information of reliable, real reportage, not just absolute sharing of information without responsibility. Because this time, lack of responsibility meant becoming someone who's not interested in the vaccine hesitancy, to not knowing how to take care of myself, right? And to save my life. So these are the situations that show us where to find information. All of us have looked for platforms. I think we went off platforms. We went off certain types of platforms we used to accessing information from. So we need to build on that. If in a crisis, a deep crisis, if you're able to draw information from some place, many places, then you need to place your task, invest in those, and the models they espouse, media models that they espouse that get our trust, and look towards those and work on those. So I think that's probably what we should look at.
I think that I didn't mention somehow that ownership is stuck to my mind. And I also know what I notice is that segmentation of the society, because obviously I will go to the platforms that are close to my political affiliation. This morning, when I've heard distinguished professor quoting Antonio Negri, I knew I'm at the right place because that's my crew. But that's how I also choose what I'm gonna trust. And I think that's when the problem starts, because that's how the conspiracy theories are created. Because my platform is telling me vaccines are not good. Particularly, this was the problem in the part of the world where I come, 45% was only vaccinated against COVID. They all thought it's fake. How do you find that? How do you counter that information? So that's both, it's very convenient to go to the platforms of the sources that are close to your heart, that you want to, and then you perpetuate your beliefs. I somehow think, and I still have belief that we as media, mainstream media or legacy media, still have power. Again, I'm going to go to the code of ethics and these self-regulatory principles that we have as our main skill compared to social media, to citizen journalists, so that somehow we can gain the trust back and we can show them when we report on pandemics, on the political unrest, on the corruption, you can trust us because we stand on the right place. But then we need to be having public service media rather than private media. Private, yeah, we agree on. we can't go to, because obviously that the ownership will dictate the direction of the reporting. So, thanks.
Again, to put it into context, next 18 months, we will see major elections in our region. Sri Lanka, we are facing local elections, but definitely we will face presidential and parliamentary elections within the next 18 months. And India, we are facing elections in May next year, Bangladesh early next year, Pakistan this year, Maldives, I think, end of this year. So just look at Indian elections. Now you are asking me about information and disinformation and propaganda. Imagine the amount of propaganda items and disinformation in the Indian elections, where a person like Prime Minister Modi is campaigning, an extremely social media savvy, active politician. He has already started suppressing the narrative, counter narrative against him through this documentary, BBC documentary. But he has not banned it, but he has asked to block it from Netflix. But the university students are putting up screens and they are showing in public. And sometimes they are getting hammered also by unidentified thugs. But anyway, the propaganda machineries are extremely active. Even here, we are supposed to have elections on March 9th. So the disinformation campaigns are extremely high on our platforms. But for me, I personally think our people are smart enough to trace this propaganda and disinformation. And if you see any disinformation post, mostly those were countered within hours now. Somebody is fact-checked. We have very good fact-checking machineries now. Or at least some individuals will fact-check and post it. No, it's not true. But in this information ecosystem, I must say, the thing first capture the market, whether it's disinformation or information or whatever, the first glance capture the market. So it's very difficult to counter it. It takes time. But in any case, it cannot do the damage as mainstream media does it. While mainstream, as Dilukshi said, it's one way. It's just pouring onto your brain. But on the social media, you counter it, you argue, you comment, you have engagement with that. So that's why these blatant lies cannot survive in the ecosystem. It's a challenge. If you ask me how we can find the correct information, it's a real challenge now, because it's a major mess of information. But I think with the experience, fact checkers, counter narratives, now people are getting used to that. And the platforms are also getting smarter on regulating the content. There are loopholes, there are issues, but at least they are making some attempts. Yeah. If you have any more questions.
I'll quickly get the perspective from Sunil as well. Sunil, what are some of your thoughts and reflections?
Yeah, I mean, these are, I guess, very big questions, and the panelists have also shared a lot of thoughts. Maybe one thing I would add is that maybe what we should, one part of it is that, of course, like the others said as well, there are fact-checking organizations, there are people doing kind of important work in terms of kind of creating kind of alternative narratives, like Dilukshi said. So maybe one part of that should be then kind of fostering these types of groups, supporting them, and so on. And then I think the flip side of that also needs to happen more, to kind of promote critical thinking amongst people, so that to tell that basically whatever you're looking at, even if it's on the #generation page, look at it with a certain level of criticality and not just buy it because it's there. And of course, that's easier for me to say and much harder, right? Just to make all Sri Lankans critical. That's just like probably years and years of work after being exposed to all of the kind of the harmful, terrible things that we spoke about earlier, the racism, the sexism and homophobia and all of these types of things. So of course, it's not easy to undo these things. But I think that should be the long game for us, right? Like the kind of the shorter game might be to support these institutions, and to find creative ways to communicate these things. But maybe the long game should be to create more critical people who will just consume everything they look at with a certain level of criticality. Yeah.
Thank you, Samuel. I still, what was in the, yes, please, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Chandra. So, hypothetically, let's say, imagine a person write a story about vaccination process and how vaccine kills 12 people. Okay, but it's not factually incorrect. It's not illegal. It's not misinformation. It's correct. But it might cause a issue in society, right? How journalists or societies like hashtag generation prevent situations like that, because it's not illegal, it's factually correct, but he's obviously like abandoning the good part, like it does to the society. How you guys prevent that?
You mean to say vaccine kills people and then how media can counter that or what?
No, I'll ask it again. Imagine a hypothetical person write a story about how vaccine kills 12 people. It's a fact, right?
Yeah.
It might be a fact. Okay. So, but he already abandoned the good part of it, like how it helped people, how it normalized the situation, how it controlled it. He's not going to write any of it. He's like mainly write about that 12 people died because of the vaccine.
How do you know that 12 people died from vaccine?
Imagine, I'm just asking.
Yeah, I get the point. It's a hypothetical question. And also, if you see the video clip on the Pfizer CEO recently, he's trying to evade all the questions by the journalists. So there's a massive accusation on Pfizer now, on the hiding the store information, and how should we write about it?
He's mentioning is it's hypothetical after all. Possibly it's the context that is missing. Yeah, so that probably makes it different to a shared, post or a small story that one could do. So once you put that context as to how this happened, why the 12 people, and put expert comments to verify and give it credibility and trust, that's probably when you can make it more rounded and more acceptable and socially responsible. So you said that the whole idea is not to trigger people and into scaremongering, but this is what is necessary, and this is one of the larger criticisms when you simply share information, that often what we lose is the context.
Yeah. If I put it into context of Safi, again, when journalists get a story like this, what they should do, they should check, cross-check and double-check. So when the information, let's say it's not a plant, so journalists get information that this particular doctor is doing this thing, he's crushing the fallopian tube, then so he get the information. So where does he check this? How we cross-check it? So it's a health issue in a hospital, so he contact the director of the hospital. Okay, number one. And in this particular incident, director of the hospital is an actor of this drama. It's a plant. Number two, if it's a criminal case and it's a police complaint, you talk to the police chief of the region. And in this case, Kurunagala DIG is a plant. He's a actor of this drama. Then you contact, okay, please, hospital, okay, let's get some expert from it, as Bill said. So you contact university guy who is medical expert. In this case, Rajaratnam University, that medical expert is also plant actor of the drama. So you build a beautiful film. All the sources that journalists would contact is a plant.
Come
Yeah,
back on that. Because it's a procedural matter, right?
Yes.
It's about surgery. So how do you perform that? So if you, okay, the journalist doesn't necessarily have the opportunity to understand that this is a stage thing. Any critical thinking person, as Sanal said, should have. Yeah, this business of critical thinking is so important. So when you don't have that, it becomes easy to, feed hoaxes. We also know this group called independent, verification processes and independent authorities. So these are not necessarily the people who work in that hospital, but who are able to tell you the medical process. And that I still believe that could have been corrected if you went to someone else to find out how many nurses would be there, how many medical assistants would be there when you do this kind of process. So I still think it's possible to address.
Definitely, the team of journalists who went to the scene, they noticed the plant, and that's how we did this documentary recently, because they noticed the hospital director is directing the narrative. He's dictating the nurses. No, this is not the story I told you to tell the journalists. You're just telling, blah. So then these journalists noticed something. Then they started digging it out. That's how this entire counter narrative came. But you had another anecdote to the question. What is the role of people like institutions like #generation? That's where you come into the picture. You are not a fact-checking agency, but you have some kind of a role there. Because at the end of the day, we are all Sri Lankans. We need this country to revive, to come back. So every citizen has a role to play. Every institution has a role to play. You cannot avoid the duty. We are in a very, very bad timing. We are sitting on a timing bomb. That's my narrative on that. So every citizen has a responsibility, especially youth like you. Tell the correct story to the people, and also to keep the public and the tech companies and the other your stakeholders informed with correct facts. That's a major responsibility in this entire ecosystem. So every individual has a responsibility. Every institution has a responsibility. So hashtag, especially youth in this country. We narrowed this beautiful slogan, youth are the lifeblood of this country, but the youth were not given proper recognition. That's what happened. The decisions were taken by the dinosaurs without considering the real dynamics of this ecosystem. So #generation, these organizations, these youth, individually and institutionally, you have that responsibility. Just to finish my, I'm not being political here, but I have to narrate this. We were in Jaffna. I have been repeating this experience a few times during my speeches. We were in Jaffna last month conducting a consultation. Sarita was with us. And we did two things. One was on this social media regulation consultation, and then we dedicated another 1 or 2 hours on Sri Lanka's foreign policy, grassroots level consultation. So we had this consultation. They, fantastic inputs from this Jaffna people. And then at the concluding remark, I said, so let's get united. Let's rebuild Sri Lanka. We need to rebuild this country. We need Jaffna Tamils and Eastern Tamils and Muslims to come together and rebuild this country. Then one old Jaffna citizen raised his hand and he said, please withdraw that statement. I said, why? He said, no, don't rebuild that old Sri Lanka. That old Sri Lanka had blood, had wars, has vengeance. That old Sri Lanka had won 2 wars in the south, 1 war for 30 years. You want to bring it back by rebuilding Sri Lanka? No, we don't want that. Let's build a new Sri Lanka. Wow. So that's what we want. We want a new Sri Lanka. That building new Sri Lanka, in that process, #generation, you have massive responsibility. And you cannot avoid that. Even myself, individually, you have responsibility. Institutionally, you have a major role to play. You are playing that role, but I am reintegrating that responsibility. We have to build the new Sri Lanka.
The dinosaurs will all die off, so nothing to worry about when they're finished.
Thank you so much, panelists, for those thoughtful interventions. I want to quickly give a shout out to the person who asked the question is Chanuka Nadin Pereira, who is behind the famous photo we would all have seen during the Areglia of a mother carrying a child, the black and white photo. He's the photographer. Yes, let's give him a round of applause. And you can check out the print of the photo next room in the Storytelling for Democracy photo exhibition that will follow this session. Once again, I want to take this time to thank each and every single one of you for sharing your expertise, experience, and also nuggets of wisdom on how we go about it. I was when Bashir asked me to moderate this panel with panelists with such caliber, but it's truly humbling, and thank you for sharing your thoughts and perspectives.